He stood on that stage, his arm locked around another woman, while his pregnant wife watched from the crowd. He didn't flinch, he didn't look away. He announced her, his new partner, his new future, and just like that, in front of cameras, in front of colleagues, in front of the entire room, he erased her. No warning, no apology, no mercy. She pressed her hand to her belly and walked out alone. But here's what Alexander Grant never saw coming. The woman he called weak, she was already building the weapon that would bring his entire empire to its knees. He had the penthouse, the power, the perfect mistress by his side. She had nothing. A cracked mirror, a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, a child on the way, and a rage she hadn't yet learned to use. So who wins? The man who owns the city, or the woman he forgot to finish breaking? Stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way he planned. And the moment Olivia walks into his boardroom, in his world, and looks him dead in the eyes, that is the moment everything changes. Lesson line. This is a story about what happens when a powerful man mistakes silence for weakness and discovers, too late, that the quietest people carry the longest memory. Call to action. If you believe that truth always finds its way back, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me whose side you're on, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we tell stories that stay with you long after they're over. The room inhaled sharply. Madison, my brilliant PR manager, ascended the stage like a warrior. I let my voice fill the room. I told them she was the reason for this triumph, my partner in business, and my partner in life. The applause died. A current of whispers ran through the crowd, a satisfying chill. I watched Olivia's smile disintegrate. Her heart was a frantic drum, a sound only I could appreciate. She clutched her stomach, a primitive gesture of defense. It was a weakness I could no longer afford. Madison pressed against me, her hand a firm claim on my chest. Olivia's face blurred with tears she fought to hide. She wanted to scream, I saw it in her eyes, but she was paralyzed by the truth. The crowd stared. Their judgment was irrelevant. Their whispers were the price of power. I heard one of them. Isn't that his wife? She is pregnant, my God, another one said. The pity in their voices disgusted me. Olivia would not cry here. She still had that much pride. With a final, broken effort, she turned. The sound of her heels on the marble was a lonely retreat. Each step was a severing of a tie that had grown too tight. I did not call her name. I did not look back. My arm remained locked around Madison. Outside, the city I owned waited. Olivia's life, the one I had built for her, had just been demolished. It was necessary. She felt erased. I felt free. I had removed a flawed component from a perfect machine. She pressed her hand to her belly. She whispered a promise to a child I now saw as an obstacle. Her determination was a flicker against a hurricane. She did not yet understand. I decided she would disappear from my world, and I assumed she would do it quietly. Olivia Bennett had become a problem to be solved. To the world, she was my elegant wife, a perfect piece of my curated life. But behind that facade, she was always that girl from Ohio. Raised by a struggling mother, her humility was once a charming novelty. Now it was a liability. At 30 years old, she lacked the hunger my world demanded. She was an interior designer. She created spaces for families to feel safe, a noble but pointless endeavor. Her work was small. It was sentimental. Every choice she made was about a sense of belonging I had long outgrown. She wanted a family, a home filled with a warmth that I found suffocating. When we met, I was the answer to her prayers. I was older, I was powerful. The romance was a whirlwind I engineered. The rooftop dinners and whispered promises were a script I had perfected. She was a project, a beautiful, trusting girl who ignored every warning. She was told I loved power more than people. They were right. For years, she played the part of the perfect wife. She stood at my side at galas. She smiled for the cameras. She hid her exhaustion behind a mask of grace. She believed our marriage was real. The pregnancy was supposed to be her triumph, the moment I would finally become the man she wanted me to be. But her needs grew with the child. The nausea, the dizziness, the long afternoons she spent alone in our penthouse. She became a constant, silent demand. I rarely asked how she felt. I buried myself in work, in mergers, and late calls that were my true passion. Olivia told herself it was temporary. She painted the nursery in soft, hopeful colors. Each star on the ceiling was a testament to her delusion. She wrote letters in a journal to an unborn child, describing a life we would never have, a life I did not want. She sensed something was wrong. She had to. My eyes no longer saw her. My touch was a memory. The fear that grew inside her was her own intuition finally waking up. That fear became reality on the stage, under the hot lights of the gala. As Olivia walked out of that ballroom, she thought a battle was beginning. She was mistaken. The war was already over. The world I built was made of glass and steel. From the outside, it was perfect. Our penthouse overlooked the city. Every night, the skyline was a testament to my power. For her, it was a cage. The penthouse was filled with a luxury that bored me. Marble counters from Italy, chandeliers that dripped crystals, a closet larger than the home of her childhood. Every detail was a statement of my success. Our guests would whisper about how lucky she was. But the silence in those rooms was a reflection of her own emptiness. I thrived in that world. The boardrooms, the jets, the endless invitations. At Grant Financial, they feared me. That fear was my greatest tool. Madison Clark understood that. She moved through my world with a dancer's grace. She laughed at the right moments. She shared my ambition. She wanted the power I possessed. Olivia was a shadow in those same halls. I remember her visits to my office, her pathetic offerings of homemade lunch. I dismissed her with a polite smile, too busy for such sentiment. In the conference rooms, she sat in silence while Madison's voice commanded attention. In those moments, I saw the truth. She did not belong. Not because she was unworthy, but because she was a relic of a life I no longer wanted. At home, the luxury she lived in was a constant reminder of her failure to adapt. The nursery was the only room she felt alive in. The rest of the penthouse was a tomb. She would stare out the window at the people below, envying their simple lives. She never understood. I did not love appearances. I loved strength. I loved the power that came with the perfect image. Olivia was a part of that image until she became a flaw. Madison was the correction. The gala was not just a humiliation. It was a surgical procedure. I was removing a weakness before it could spread. Madison was already in her place long before that night. The penthouse that Olivia saw as a refuge was now enemy territory. Every polished surface reflected her obsolescence. I saw her look around at the cold perfection. She would not raise her child in a world built on my terms. So she would leave. She would start over with nothing. She believed freedom was worth more than anything I could give her. A foolish, romantic notion. I was not always the man who did this. I was once charming. I was persuasive. I could make anyone believe the impossible was possible. That is how I built my empire, on ambition and a complete refusal to fail. Progress required a certain hardness. I learned that early. People are not people. They are assets or liabilities, stepping stones to something greater. Olivia was an asset for a time. Her little design projects were charming. I even visited one, but my empire demanded more than charm. Her world was small. My deals were in the billions. I told her to leave the real work to me. Publicly, I was the perfect husband. Privately, my words were forging a stronger future. That is when I found Madison Clark. She was not beautiful. She was powerful. She was ambitious. Unlike Olivia, she did not speak of warm homes or decorated nurseries. Madison spoke of influence, market share, and brand dominance. She understood my hunger because it was her own. Every compliment was a strategic move. Every smile was a closing deal. Every touch was a confirmation that she was my true partner. Madison was too smart to attack Olivia directly. At first, she played the supporter. Behind the scenes, she helped me clear away the clutter. My schedule became a weapon. It kept me from distractions like doctor appointments. Madison planted seeds of logic in my ear. Olivia did not project the right image for a chief executive officer's wife. I came home later because ambition does not sleep. The scent on my suits was the smell of power. Her questions were static, paranoia, hormones. I made her question her own reality. That was my true power, not just to move on, but to make her believe she was the one who was lost. By the gala, I was exactly the man I needed to be. I had become a king. And a king can't be sentimental. He must stand before his court and discard what no longer serves the throne. Madison did not need to speak. She stood beside me, a vision of our future, while I handled the unpleasant business. To me, Olivia was a ghost of a former life. To Madison, she was a problem already solved. But we miscalculated. We saw a quiet woman. We did not see the foundation of strength hidden beneath. The woman we erased was about to start a new story. One where my logic and Madison's strategy would face an unforeseen variable. My empire was built on strength, not betrayal. The gala was my proudest moment. I chose Madison's gown myself, midnight blue. It commanded respect. I hoped Olivia would see it and understand the new world order. Instead, she became a symbol of the past. When I pulled Madison to the stage, the room paused. The applause was a courtesy, a brief, awkward sound from people who could not see the bigger picture. Cameras flashed. They captured Madison's victory and my unwavering resolve. I felt Olivia's presence fade. Her essence left the room. The air buzzed with whispers, small minds discussing small matters. Isn't his wife right there? She's pregnant. Men shook their heads in ignorance. Women offered pity I did not need. I wanted her to disappear quietly. She turned slowly, each movement a performance of dignity, as if one wrong step would shatter her composure. Her hand went to her belly, a shield, a final sentimental gesture. She did not cry. She did not make a scene. She simply walked away. Her steps were a quiet surrender on the marble floor. I did not call her name. Madison remained perfectly still. The transition was complete. Outside, the cold New York night would be her new reality. I imagined her clutching her purse, knuckles white, breathing thin air. Tears would blur the city lights. A fitting end to a story that had run its course. She would hail a cab. The driver would see a sad woman in a pretty dress. She would give an address, Brooklyn. Of course! A place to be forgotten. In the back of the cab, her control would break. Tears for a life she could not keep. Her forehead against the glass, watching my city rush by. Every tower a monument to the man she had lost. She would think of the nursery, the letters to an unborn child. The dream of a strong father was an illusion. She had married an emperor. Now that dream was gone. I pictured her wrapping her arms around herself, whispering promises to the life inside. I will protect you. Words born of desperation. Her voice would break, but it would not reach me. The cab would stop. She would exit in front of some unremarkable building. The gown, once a symbol of her status, would be just a wet, heavy cloth. She would not know what came next. She would only know that her chapter in my life was over. From the ashes of her old life, a new problem was about to rise. The first nights in Brooklyn were as I expected. She traded my world for peeling wallpaper and the smell of decay. A tiny apartment, one small bedroom, a flickering light. It was the opposite of the life I had given her. Yet she would mistake this for control. A sad illusion buried under fear. She would keep the curtains drawn, hiding from my success, my face on every newspaper, my name on every broadcast. She could not escape me. The silence would be her prison. Nights would be her tormentor. Sitting on a cheap bed, whispering to her child, "It is just us now," her voice trembling. "I do not know how I am going to do this. I promise I will try." Food would be meaningless. She would eat because she had to. Simple things. Toast, soup, tea. But the baby needed more. She would miss her vitamins. Her reflection would show a stranger, pale skin, red eyes, unkempt. The woman who once graced galas was now just a tired face in a cracked mirror. The weight of my decision would press on her. She would replay that night. My victory, her humiliation. It was the price of progress. Madison's smile, my hand holding hers. These images would be her ghosts. They would burn inside her. But beneath the pain, I knew something else could grow. Anger, a quiet spark. She would remember the years she invested, the life she built around me. She would remember the nursery and the promises. She would realize I took much, but not all. She still had the child, my child, a dangerous loose end. Her hands would shake, but she would write, pouring her pain onto a page. "You are the reason I will keep fighting." A declaration. We are not broken. We will rise again. It was a faint pulse of defiance. Not strength, not yet, but it was a beginning. In the shadows of her new life, she was breaking, but in the fractures, something resilient was taking hold. And soon, an unpredictable element would enter the equation. After 3 weeks, she would leave the apartment. A doctor's appointment, a necessary risk. She would dress to be invisible. A loose sweater, messy hair, another anonymous woman in the city. The waiting room would be filled with mothers and children. Her new peers. She would sit in a corner, praying for anonymity. The receptionist would call her name. She would stand. And then she would hear a voice she knew. Olivia. Olivia Bennett. My carefully constructed world had just developed its first crack. She had to be removed. It was a simple, clean decision. Like excising a tumor before it spreads. Olivia was weakness. She was sentiment. An anchor holding me to a shore I had long since outgrown. This new path required a different kind of partner. Madison understood power. Madison understood the mission. Olivia only understood feelings. This was not cruelty. It was strategy. It was necessary for growth. My legacy demanded this sacrifice. It was the only right thing to do. She would have dragged me down into mediocrity. The news of her pregnancy was an irritation, a loose thread in an otherwise perfect design. I imagined she was somewhere cold and alone, hiding her shame. It was a consequence of her own foolish, emotional choices. She chose to leave. She chose to be a victim. I offered her a kingdom. She ran to a burrow I would not even drive through. My life now was clean. It was sharp. Madison was at my side, a partner who reflected my own strength back at me, a true asset. Weakness had to be cut away. That was the first rule of building an empire. Olivia had become a liability, her quiet sadness a drain on my ambition. So I made a strategic choice. I chose strength. I chose a partner who understood power. Every decision was a calculated step toward a greater goal. I was not being cruel. I was being practical. Securing my legacy required a queen, not a ghost haunting the hallways. I was doing what a man in my position had to do. It was a necessary sacrifice. Madison was an asset. She mirrored my drive. Our public appearances were not a charade. They were a declaration of power. Each photograph was a victory, a message to the world that I was ascending. We were the perfect couple because we were built on mutual ambition, not fragile emotions. The world saw a man who had everything, and they were right. I had meticulously constructed my life for success. I saw no cracks in my foundation. There were none to see. Madison's ambition was a mirror of my own. I saw her hunger as a virtue. She spoke of image and legacy. She understood the game. She affirmed my instincts. Her counsel felt like my own thoughts spoken aloud. When she suggested removing old advisors, it felt logical. They were voices of caution, voices of the past. Madison was the voice of the future. Her loyalty was to our shared ascent. That was the only loyalty I required. She was not a woman. She was an instrument of my will. Old loyalties are liabilities. They breed complacency. I purged the dissenters. I surrounded myself with people who said, yes. I needed speed. I needed aggressive growth. The warnings from the board were the whines of old men afraid of risk. I was building something new. Their fear was an anchor. I cut it loose. Madison's moods were a small price to pay. Her demands were a test of my devotion to our new image. It was a game I could afford to play. A king must be generous. I had made my choice in front of the world. To reverse course now would be to admit a mistake. I never admit mistakes. The whispers in the halls were the sounds of envy. My employees were weak. They could not comprehend my vision. Their failures were their own. I walked the floors with absolute certainty. I gave orders. I demanded results. That flicker of doubt was nothing. It was a ghost, a phantom pain from a limb I had already severed. It meant nothing. Madison was my public face, my visionary partner. I trusted her to manage the investors. Her charm was an asset I deployed strategically. She understood her role perfectly. Alexander is the power. She is the grace. It was a flawless system. The trap was for my enemies, not for me. I built the entire machine. Olivia was a distant memory, a forgotten problem in a forgotten part of the city. Fate was not weaving stories. I was writing the one that mattered, my story. I sometimes pictured her in that desolate burrow. It was a fitting backdrop for her choices. No drivers, no luxuries, no protection, just the harsh reality she had chosen over me. It was a satisfying thought. It confirmed my judgment. She was living a life of consequence. I felt a cold sense of justice. She had to learn. Every morning, I woke up in a penthouse overlooking the park. My world was expanding. Hers was shrinking. That was the natural order of things. A furniture store. The thought was almost amusing. How pathetically small. I had offered her the world. She chose to arrange chairs for strangers. It proved I was right all along. Her ambitions were always so limited, so domestic. Mr. Rosen, a kind, old man, how perfect. She always did gravitate toward weakness. She was surrounding herself with mediocrity. It was like she was trying to erase the greatness I had shown her. She could never escape what she was. Her passion was never a career. It was a hobby, a pleasant distraction I allowed. Her skills were for decorating my home, not for building a life. That she was now clinging to it was pathetic. A thread of identity. I gave her an identity. She was my wife. That should have been enough, but it was not. She wanted more, or maybe she wanted less. I never truly understood. I only knew she did not fit the plan. The nights are never heavy for me. They are filled with plans. I heard through channels that Daniel Hayes was seen with her. An old friend. How quaint. Let her gather her little allies. Let her file her little lawsuits. My lawyers would bury her. Her wounds were self-inflicted. She ran from a palace. Fear was her natural state. She was always afraid. Afraid of my ambition. Afraid of my power. Now she was afraid of me. Good. Fear is a useful tool. It establishes boundaries. It maintains order. She was designing interiors. For whom? People who lived in walk-up apartments? Her gift was for choosing pillows. My gift was for building empires. We were not the same. Let her find her small flicker of confidence. It would be extinguished by the shadow I cast. I owned the city. I owned the future. Her reflection in a window was all she would ever be. A faint image, barely there. Her baby would be born into nothing, a world of her own making. I do not think about the past. It is a dead country with no resources to plunder. But sometimes a memory ambushes me, the art gallery. She was different then, unspoiled. She looked at me with a kind of awe. It was intoxicating. I remember the quiet of her small apartment, the way she seemed so grateful for everything. It felt good to be her entire world. The past is a trap. I remind myself of this. I close my eyes and see only the future. I saw her potential. A beautiful, intelligent woman who could be molded. She was a raw material for the life I was designing. The pursuit was a necessary investment. The dinners, the trips, the flowers, they were the tools of acquisition. She thought it was a dream. It was a transaction. I gave her a world she could never have reached on her own. She gave me her adoration. She called it love. I called it a fair exchange. For a while it was. I provided her everything. Comfort, a future. The memories she clings to were investments. Coffee was a routine. Laughter was a simple pleasure before the real work began. Her world remained small. Mine had to grow. An empire does not build itself on sentiment. Her projects were trivial. Her needs became a distraction from my destiny. She was a beautiful chapter. But the book had to continue. I was moving forward. She insisted on staying behind. A child? She saw a lifeline. I saw an anchor. It was another chain when I needed to be free. My focus was the market, the next acquisition, the legacy. There was no time for rocking in a cradle. My response was a courtesy, a small acknowledgement before I returned to what mattered. I was building a kingdom for an heir, not just a nursery. This was a necessary sacrifice. She saw only the small picture. She could never see the throne. She calls it humiliation. I call it severance. A clean cut. The man who promised forever was a boy. The man I became had greater promises to keep. To myself, to my name, love was never enough. Power is the only true currency. She chose to cling to a ghost. I chose to build a god. Her quiet struggle is of her own making. My story was just beginning. Her story was already over. The whispers are predictable. They are the sounds of envy. Every king hears them from the shadows. The deals are solid. My vision is clear. The circling predators will find no weakness here. Madison understands this. She is not blinded by sentiment. She sees the world for what it is, a battlefield. That is why I chose her. She is a warrior. Olivia was a garden that needed constant tending. I require a fortress. Her impatience is a new development, a flaw I had not anticipated. She speaks of risks, but she forgets I am the master of risk. Her words are knives. Slipping. Laughing. No one laughs at me. They fear me. They respect me. Control is my lifeblood. I will purge the weak. I will remove the disloyal. I am not slipping. I am sharpening my blade. My orders are absolute. My will is law. This is not cruelty. This is command. Her meetings are strategic. Her charm is a weapon we deploy. She is my ambassador in rooms filled with lesser men. Alexander has vision. She speaks the truth. She is an extension of my will. The media prints fiction. They call me impulsive. They call me unstable. They mistake decisiveness for madness. They want a narrative of a falling king. Their ink will run dry long before my power does. The pretense is gone. Her eyes are cold calculators. She speaks of my place as if it is temporary. She forgets I built the board on which she plays. Her laughter is ice. Without me, you are finished. The words trigger not fear, but a cold clarity. I see her for what she is. Not a partner, a rival, a viper I welcomed into my bed. Olivia was weak. Madison is dangerous, and danger must be eliminated. The city glitters below. It is still my kingdom. The reflection in the glass is a conqueror. I am not unraveling. I am evolving. Madison is a complication, a problem to be solved, just as Olivia was. This is not a collapse. It is a consolidation of power. The wife I discarded is a memory, a ghost with no power. She cannot touch me here. I am untouchable. A lawyer, some insignificant man fighting for a forgotten woman. He sees arrogance. He sees secrecy. He sees what he wants to see. He does not see the architecture of power. Olivia feeds him her sad story, a pathetic tale of betrayal. He thinks he is a hero. He is a pawn in a game he does not understand. My foundation is solid rock. He is digging in the sand with a plastic shovel. The numbers are a language he cannot speak. Shell companies, offshore accounts. These are the tools of titans, not the crimes of common men. He thinks he has found a secret. He has found a reflection of his own ignorance. An analyst betrayed me for a cup of coffee. This proves nothing. They call it fraud. I call it the price of greatness. He is holding a map he cannot read. This is not a mistake. It was a calculated risk. Madison knew the stakes. She was a willing participant. Her hands are as dirty as mine. This lawyer believes he holds a key. He speaks of justice. He speaks of dignity. These are words for children. This is about power. And he has none. Olivia will get nothing. Her life is a sunk cost. His evidence is a whisper in a storm. He returns to her, the savior with his flimsy proof. He offers her hope like a piece of bread. He tells her I am not untouchable. He lies. He is poisoning her with false courage. Let her have her moment. Let her believe she has a chance. Her hope is irrelevant. The game is played far above her head. She is a spectator, not a player. And the game is far from over. She thinks she is no longer powerless, a amusing thought. The truth is not a sword. It is a rumor. And I am the master of rumors. She has been broken for so long, she mistakes a single crack of light for the dawn. It is not. It is the headlight of an oncoming train. Her newfound strength is an illusion, a fleeting dream before she wakes up to the nightmare. She brushes her hair, she walks outside. She calls this rebuilding. I call it passing the time. She whispers to her belly about what they deserve. I gave her a world. She chose a cage. Her goals are scribbled in a notebook. Mine are carved into the skyline. There is no comparison. She is a ghost haunting the ruins of her own small life. Her defiance is meaningless. She returns to her craft, a quaint hobby, sketching furniture for strangers. She has found her level. This is the strength she celebrates. This small, pathetic existence. The lawyer speaks of courage. Courage does not stop an avalanche. And I am an avalanche. She is a footnote. A forgotten queen in a chess game I have already won. She just does not know it yet. This was the cost of building an empire. A clean break. It was a necessary amputation to save the body. Olivia was a weight, a distraction from the vision. I had given her a life of comfort, but she could not grasp the scale of my ambition. Pride, I am told, is a sin, but my pride is the engine of progress. She was a relic of a life I had outgrown. So I cut the cord. I moved on. I chose a partner who understood power. My promises were not to a child, but to a legacy that would echo for generations. I would show the world what true strength looks like. Daniel's little folder of papers was nothing, just the last gasp of a forgotten world. It was a collection of trifles, misunderstandings meant for smaller minds. The tremors in my own hands were not from fear, but from the thrill of the fight ahead. This was not Olivia's chance. It was my chance to finally remove the last piece of sentiment from the machine. I watched her from afar, preparing her little war. She thought she was fighting for herself, for some misplaced sense of justice. She was fighting for a world that no longer existed. For the first time since I left her, my path was clear, my focus absolute. I was no longer a husband. I was a king securing his throne. She had no idea that the man she thought she knew had erased her long ago. The boardroom was my sanctuary, a temple of glass and steel overlooking my domain. This morning, my acolytes were restless. Their whispers were an annoying buzz, a sign of weak faith. I arrived to restore order. My fury was a tool, sharp and precise. Rumors were for the common rabble, not for us. I slammed the folder down, a reminder of my authority. We are not here to fear shadows, I began. We are here to remind them who casts them. But before my sermon could begin, the doors slid open. Every head turned. The room went silent. And there she was, a ghost in a well-tailored suit. This was not the broken thing I had left behind weeks ago. Her hair was different. Her spine was straight. She stood with a stillness that was unnerving, a hand on her belly. Her eyes found mine and held. For a moment, the air left my lungs. Olivia, I heard myself say, a name from another lifetime. My executives exchanged confused glances. Madison, beside me, went rigid. Her surprise was a flicker of weakness I did not like. Her smile was a painted mask. Olivia moved toward the table, her steps echoing in the silence. My silence. I am not here to make a scene, she said. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the room like a blade. I am here because I have something to say. It is in your best interest to listen. She placed a folder on the polished wood. Daniel's pathetic evidence. Murmurs filled the void. My face felt cold. What is this? I demanded. The truth, she answered, about offshore accounts, about fraudulent reports, about the lies you used to build an empire. Her eyes swept across my board. And the truth about discarding your wife and unborn child for a mistress. The gasps were like a physical blow. Madison tried to speak, but Olivia's gaze pinned her to her chair. You played your part, Madison, but this board should know you were more than my partner in public. You were my partner in crime. Madison's face turned red. Her composure cracked. My executives started shuffling through the papers. I saw their eyes widen as they read the carefully curated fiction. They were believing it. My hands tightened into fists. You think you can come in here and... Yes. Her word cut mine short. I can because you saw me as weak. You thought I would crumble. You thought shame would be my grave. You forgot who I was. She touched her stomach. I am a mother. My child's name will not be tarnished by your failures. The silence that followed was a vacuum. For the first time, I had no response. And in their eyes, I saw it. I was no longer the king. I was the monster she had painted me to be. The room erupted, a chaos I did not command. They devoured her documents like starving animals. My face burned hot. My perfect image of control was shattering. This is absurd, I snarled, my hand hitting the table. Lies fabricated by a bitter, vengeful woman. My eyes drilled into hers, willing her to break, but she did not. Is it? Her voice was a steady, cold line. She pointed to a page. These transfers went to shell companies. They lead to your Cayman accounts. Your signature is on every single one. Explain that, Alexander. The room fell silent again. Every eye was on me. Madison was squirming. For weeks she had thrived in the shadows I cast, but now the light was on her. She wet her lips, her confidence gone. An executive turned to her. Miss Clark, your name is here as well. Can you explain your involvement? The mask shattered completely. Madison sat up, her voice like ice. I followed instructions. I did everything at Alexander's direction. If fraud occurred, the responsibility is his alone. My head snapped toward her. The betrayal was instant. Absolute. You liar, I hissed. But she was not finished. She leaned toward this board, a perfect victim. I warned him. I told him he was being reckless. He would not listen. I was pressured to comply. I have nothing to hide. The blade twisted. My mistress, the woman who was my conquest, was now my executioner. I tried to regain command, but the loyalty in the room had evaporated. A board member cleared his throat. If these documents are authentic, we are facing a federal case. Our shareholders will revolt. We cannot let this company sink with him. Another man nodded. We may need to discuss his immediate removal. My voice cracked with rage. You fools! You think you can run this without me? I built this. Olivia's voice cut through my fury. You built it on lies, Alexander, and lies fall apart. The boardroom doors opened. The sound of reporters shouting my name flooded the room. Someone had leaked it all. The vultures were circling. Madison picked up her purse, her smile a razor. Good luck with this, she murmured, then walked out, leaving me in the ruins. I fell into my chair, the strength gone from my legs. For the first time, I was not the hunter. I was the prey. As the foundations of my kingdom cracked, Olivia walked out, her head high. She was not the woman I broke. She was the one who had broken me. The aftermath was swift. By the time I left the building, the storm was raging. Reporters were a frantic mob. Microphones were weapons. Their flashes were blinding. Mr. Grant, are the allegations true? Did you coerce Madison Clark? Where is Olivia? I pushed through them, my own rage a shield. Hours later, I stormed into my penthouse. The fortress felt like a tomb. I was a cornered animal. Madison was there. She was lounging on the sofa, a glass of wine in her hand. You humiliated me, I growled, kicking the door closed. You abandoned me to the wolves. Her smile was a placid, hateful thing. I saved myself. Your ship was sinking, Alexander. I simply found a lifeboat. My grip tightened. After everything I had built for you, after I made you, Madison simply placed her glass down. You did not make me anything. You used me as a tool. And I used you as a ladder. She smiled then. But the ladder only goes so far, and now you are the bottom rung. My own fury choked me. You are nothing without my name. Her laughter was ice. The investors disagree. They see a future. And you are not in it. You are a relic. Every word was a calculated strike. She was dismantling me with the same cold precision I had taught her. It was all a performance, and she was delivering the closing monologue. She pulled her arm from my grasp. Her face a mask of contempt. Do not touch me again. Your desperation is ugly. I needed a king, Alexander, not a weeping man clutching a hollow crown. She moved toward the door, a predator leaving its kill. I called her name, the sound weak in the sudden silence. Madison, you need me. She never turned. The heavy door clicked shut. It was the sound of my world ending. The silence in this penthouse is a clean blade. It cuts away the noise. For once, I can think clearly. I look at the marble, the gold, the city sleeping below. This is what order looks like. Madison was chaos, a parasite I had to remove. Olivia was a different kind of weakness, a sentimental anchor. Some things must be sacrificed for an empire to stand. My kingdom needed a purge. I am left with the clean, hard truth. Power is a solitary pursuit. Olivia never understood that. She is probably sketching in some tiny apartment, lost in small dreams. Her world is a pencil line on paper. My world is this city, forged from will and precision. Contractions of a business deal are what matter. A body's trivial pains are distractions. The panicked call to some lesser man would be beneath my notice. She chose a world of fragile walls dependencies. Daniel. The name tastes like pity, a man defined by service to others. He carries her, a loyal dog tending to its wounded master. I see their ride to the hospital in my mind, a pathetic scene of fear and clinging hands. True strength is facing the inevitable alone. Whispering pleas to the universe is a waste of breath. The universe only responds to power, to action, not to weakness. The hospital is a sterile factory for the weak. Bright lights and noise cannot disguise the stench of frailty. I once promised her my protection. I promised to lift her into my world, but she could not handle the altitude. She was afraid of the heights. His words, telling her she is strong, are a lie. She is being coddled. I left her so she would have to find her own strength or break. But she found another man to lean on instead. Her screams would be a symphony of her own failure. A battle she could have avoided if she had only been stronger. Then the sound of a new life. Another mouth to feed, another vessel for weakness in the world. They would call it a miracle. I call it a consequence. A girl, another potential vulnerability. I see her face, and I see only a reflection of her mother's flaws. Beautiful. A word for art and objects, not for flesh and blood. Her heart swells with a cheap, biological love, a hormonal response to childbirth. My promises were never about safety. They were about greatness. She has settled for a lesser life, a smaller world. This is not a new beginning for her. It is a retreat into a smaller, safer cage. A story she tells herself to endure the life she chose. Olivia holds her child while my name is dragged through the mud. A carefully orchestrated attack. Daniel, the insignificant gnat, found a way to bite. The headlines are a weapon, not a truth. Grant financial empire crumbles, a fiction for the masses. The cameras that once worshipped my success now feast on a manufactured scandal. This is not justice. This is a coup. I walk into my office and see rats deserting a ship. Their averted eyes are a confession of their betrayal. Madison, the serpent, played her part perfectly. She paints herself as a victim, a classic and cowardly move. She leaks her lies, washing her hands of the strategy we built together. Federal agents arrive, actors in a play written by my enemies. They think this is an ending. At the press conference, I speak the truth. I am innocent. These are coordinated lies. But truth no longer matters. In an age of spectacle, they want a villain. They shout their rehearsed questions. The one about Madison is designed to break me. I do not freeze from fear. I freeze with contempt for their pathetic theater. The cameras capture a king cornered by jackals. That is the image they will sell. I can see them now, in that sterile room, watching my downfall. The baby is a prop in their little drama of revenge. Her closure is a fantasy. She feels nothing. Because she is empty, her world is small and insignificant. My name is still on every television. My fall is more important than her entire existence. This is not justice. It is envy. They freeze my assets. They take my home. They erase my name. They believe this makes me powerless. They think a woman I discarded brought me down. A foolish narrative for a foolish world. I was brought down by a network of lesser men who used her as their excuse. I underestimated their collective jealousy. That was my only mistake. Not her. Never her. Her life now is a predictable story. A small apartment filled with the smell of milk and regret. The child is her anchor, Grace. A name for something she will never truly possess. Daniel is her keeper, ensuring she remains in her cage. Now he brings a new man. Another replacement. She is a vessel to be filled, a problem to be solved by others. This is not her choice. Ethan Reynolds. I know the name. A different kind of predator. He wears the disguise of kindness. Calm. Grounded. These are words for the weak. He sees her scars not with respect, but with calculation. A vulnerability to be exploited. He speaks of her courage. He is simply telling her what she needs to hear. A simple tactic for a simple woman. I feel no anger, only a distant, cold pity. He offers her work, a clever way to create dependency. He compliments her little hobby, her eye for design. He validates her delusions of talent. He pays her, respects her, encourages her, all part of the long game of acquisition. He is building a cage with velvet bars. She will walk into it willingly, believing it is a home. It is all so predictable. It is almost boring to watch. And there it is. Hope, the opiate of the powerless. She watches him hold the child and sees a future. I see a transaction. She is trading her pain for a new form of captivity. She thinks he is different. But men with power are all the same. We just have different methods. I look at the walls of my prison cell, and I know one thing. I was right to cut her loose. I am free. She is not. I heard whispers about her new life, about the child, about him. It meant nothing. She was a ghost from a past I had erased. My focus was on survival. My empire was bleeding out, and I was alone in the throne room. Olivia had found her quiet little life. Good for her. It proved my point. She was meant for small things. My mistake was not leaving her. It was choosing the wrong replacement. Madison was the viper I'd invited into my house. That was my only error in judgment. He was some patient, gentle man, the opposite of me. He was everything she probably cried for in the dark. He could have her. He could have the quiet nights and the gentle words. I was forged for war, for conquest. Alexander the Great did not nurture. He conquered. They could build their little life on the ruins of my sacrifice. He could play the hero. He could fix the broken thing I had discarded. It was a footnote in a much larger story. My story. A story of betrayal. You have come so far. That is what they said about me, too. Now I stood in a courtroom. It felt like a stage play, and I was the villain. They picked apart my life, my work, my legacy. One by one, my allies became my accusers. Their lies were sharp and well rehearsed. I saw Madison on the stand. She was brilliant. She played the victim with masterful skill, painting me as a monster. She used my own tactics against me, and I could do nothing but watch my life burn to the ground. She sold them a story, and they bought every word. The jury saw a villain, not a visionary. The sentence was a lifetime. They sold my home. They broke my company into pieces. They made my name a curse. The cameras flashed as they led me away. My face was stone. I would not give them tears. I had no one, not a partner, not an ally, not a wife. I had built an empire of sand. And now the tide had come in. I chose to be alone at the top. I just never expected to be alone at the bottom. Justice. She probably called it justice. Her victory was a quiet life, a child's birthday, a man who looked at her with soft eyes. That was her prize. She had won a little game I was no longer playing. From my cell, the world became very small. I heard about her happiness. It was a distant, irritating noise. I pictured her holding that child, living in a world free of me, free of ambition. It was a pathetic little victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. She was free, and I was not. She had a daughter. She had a new man. My story was not about defeat. It was about theft. They stole my life from me. They stole my legacy. A woman I cast aside was now living a better life. That was the final insult. This was not a lesson in healing. It was a lesson in treachery. Life does not break you. People do. I was not an impediment to her action. I was the action. I was the storm. She just happened to find a harbor after the wreckage. I was the one who stood in the way. And so I became the way for everyone else to get what they wanted. Olivia found her strength. Madison found her power. Ethan found a family. They all grew on my grave. Do not remember my setbacks. Remember my reign. They can share my story as a warning, but let them never forget who built the kingdom they now inhabit. I am the darkness that was necessary for their light, and I will never let myself believe anything else. Before you go, I want to sit with you for just a moment, because this wasn't just a story about a man who cheated on his wife. This was a story about power and what it costs when it becomes the only thing a person worships. Alexander Grant believed he was building an empire, and in a way, he was. But the foundation he chose, control, manipulation, cold calculation, was never rock. It was glass, beautiful from the outside, lethal when it finally broke. He looked at Olivia and saw a liability. He looked at Madison and saw an asset. He looked at his unborn child and saw an obstacle. He looked at the world around him and saw nothing, nothing, except how each person could be used and discarded in service of his ascent. And that is the tragedy at the center of this story. Not that he failed, but that he never once understood why. Here is the first lesson this story teaches us. The people you underestimate are rarely as powerless as you believe. Alexander saw a quiet woman, a woman from Ohio, a woman who painted nurseries and kept journals and brought homemade lunches to a man who didn't even look up from his desk. He saw small, he saw soft. He saw someone easy to erase. But Olivia was not small. She was contained. There is a difference. Contained strength is the most dangerous kind because it waits. It gathers. It does not announce itself until the exact moment it needs to. When she walked into that boardroom, she was not the woman he had humiliated at the gala. She was everything he had forced her to become, and he had no one to blame but himself. The second lesson is this: the way you treat people in your most powerful moments defines who you truly are. It is easy to be kind when you have nothing. Kindness costs little when there is little to lose. But Alexander had everything: the penthouse, the title, the applause, the cameras. And in that moment, that single, defining moment on that stage, he chose humiliation over humanity. He chose spectacle over decency. He chose to make his pregnant wife a public casualty of his ambition. That choice revealed him completely. Power does not corrupt good people. It reveals who they already were when no one was watching. The third lesson may be the hardest. Building your life on the erasure of someone else is not strength. It is fear. Alexander believed he was fearless. He spoke the language of kings and conquerors. He surrounded himself with people who reflected his own image back at him and called it loyalty. But listen to what he actually feared. He feared dependence. He feared love, real love, the kind that asks something of you. He feared a child, because a child cannot be controlled or leveraged or deployed. He feared Olivia's goodness, because it reminded him of the man he had chosen not to be. Everything he destroyed, He destroyed because it scared him. And in the end, in a prison cell, in the silence he had always claimed to want, he finally had everything he had built his life around. He was completely, utterly alone. And then there is Olivia. She did not win because she was perfect. She won because she refused to let him decide who she was. She had every reason to collapse. She had nothing. No money, no home, no partner, no safety net. She had a body that was exhausted, and a heart that was broken, and a world that had watched her be humiliated in front of everyone. And she got up anyway. Not loudly, not immediately, not without pain, but she got up. She took her grief and her rage and her love for a child who hadn't yet taken a single breath, and she turned it into purpose. That is not a small thing. That is everything. So, if you take nothing else from this story, take this. Your silence is not your weakness. Your patience is not your defeat. And the person who writes you off as finished has simply given you the gift of being underestimated. Do not waste it. Olivia didn't. Thank you for spending this time with us today. These stories matter, not because they are dramatic, though they are, but because somewhere inside them is a mirror, and sometimes we need to look. We'll see you in the next one. Editorial disclaimer. This content has been manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and life lessons to our audience. All characters and events are fictional and created for storytelling and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is purely coincidental.